My wife is dressed in black. I'm dressed in black. I thought about years ago you'd see couples who dress alike. We've been married 100 years, and this is the first time I remember us dressing alike, so I guess we're starting over. I have no idea. But that's just weird. So, is that why you laid this out? Oh, you didn't lay this out, did you? Okay, just checking. We're going to continue on with Abram today. We're going to continue on with Abram, Genesis chapter 12, second sermon in the series. God does a lot of great things that we just take for granted. I want to ask you about paying attention. You know, sometimes it's just easy to get caught up in the moment and miss what's being said to you. Has that ever happened to anyone else? You just kind of get caught up and you think, what did they just say? Is that something I needed to know? Oh, okay, good. I love confessions. Good. And we got one. Or maybe you've been distracted by the enormous opportunity, by a large opportunity that it was right there before you, or the immenseness of the moment. And you just got caught up. It was just such a big moment, and wait, what did they say? Or maybe you just weren't paying attention. That's usually mine. No matter what our excuse, we've probably missed something that we needed to hear. Well, today in our series, Abram has probably missed something that he needed to hear. And what if that something was life-changing? What if I was going to say something today and you're busy talking to your neighbor or something and it's life-changing and God intended for you to have it and you miss it? Sometimes people have missed fame or fortune, I understand, because of that. I once talked to a man who missed a tremendous political opportunity because he was distracted at the moment. Or you've missed the opportunity. Maybe you've missed happiness or a blessing. Well, so we're going to talk about paying attention today. We're going to start with Abram. If you remember last week, God has instructed him to go to Canaan. We're sending him off to Canaan. He's been located in Ur and is moving to Canaan. But he only got a little ways and he got to Haran, and whenever he got there, they just settled down. Dad didn't want to go any farther. Well, today, Dad is gone and he's moved on. Genesis chapter 12, verses 6 and 7. You have arrived in the promised land. Here it is. Abram traveled through the land as far as the side of the great tree of Morah in Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offsprings I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Welcome to Canaan. That's the very first thing that's being said. He's just arrived. He's at the tree. The Canaanites are still in the area. And where did God say for him to go? He said, go to Canaan. He's there. Who's the welcoming committee? God. God said, look around. This is the land I'm going to give you. This is yours and for your offspring. Well, I can only imagine what traveling hundreds of miles like that would be. Remember last week, for you who were not here, here's what I said. I want you to consider, this was a 600 or 700 mile trek probably. And let's say you're driving to Missouri. All right? And you got there. I don't know why you'd want to go to Missouri, but you're going to Missouri. And you've got there. And you don't know if you're in the right place, but all of a sudden, God says, this is it. You've arrived. You're here. That's pretty plain, pretty precise. I understood that. I'm pretty slow, and I got that. I've had all this anticipation. There's been fear of my journey. I've been a little concerned, but yet I've been eager. I'm ready for all of it. Now, what should I expect? And then lo and behold, there it is. We're there. By the very next verse, though, what takes place? Abram is moving. He's on his way again. Many times, folks, we miss the blessings that God has in store for us because we're not paying attention. We're not hearing what He has to say. Perhaps we're just not listening. Or maybe it's not what we wanted to hear. Maybe we're anticipating something entirely different. Maybe we're not satisfied with what we see in the area. But whatever it is, We've arrived where God has wanted us, and we move on. We didn't stay. We made a move. Now, to prove my point today, I believe this has happened to a vast majority of all of us. That sometimes we travel right through the promised land. We go right on through. We arrive there. I want all of you to think about, and you don't have to show your hands, but many of you probably become Christians early on in life. That's usually the case in a congregation. Many of you probably got involved in the church as a teen perhaps, or as a early 20s, and then you kind of drifted away. Your family come, you started traveling one thing or another, and you drifted away, and now you've come back. That's where we're at today. That's what we're going to be talking about. I want you to think about arriving in the promised land. I want you to think about how great it should have been for Abram whenever he got there. I want you to realize he said, I will give this land to your offspring. That this is yours. This is what I want you to have. That you've arrived. Every one of you, think about the first day that you arrived in the promised land. You say, well, we're not there yet. Well, yes, you are. Now, we're on a pilgrimage through this land. There's no doubt. But when do you arrive at the promised land? Folks, I arrived at the promised land whenever God started leading my life. That's when you start making your progress towards the promised land. When God's in charge and when God is leading. So God's been leading Abram, and now he's got him to the right place. He said, you've arrived. You're here. And lo and behold, he packs up and he moves on. Now, what happens when you go through the promised land? Have you ever had the right job that was just the right job for you, and you quit because something looked better? That ever happened to you? It's happened to a lot of people, hasn't it? Or you ever had the house that suited you and your family best, and you sold it to move somewhere else? I don't know how many times I've had people say, you know, we lived in this house, we really liked it, but they built this new neighborhood and we moved out there. Man, I wish I had my old house back. You ever had the right car? I've been looking for the right car for 50 years. But ever had the right car and then sold it? Steve, this ever happened to you, buddy? I see you nodding your head. You sold it or you traded it off, and you know what you're thinking? Man, I wished I had my Mustang back. Is that what you're thinking? Confession's good for you. Yeah, I wished I had that back. See, folks, that's often what we do. We've gone to the promised land, everything was good, and now we pass on through. Most of us have experienced at least one, if not all of these. Now for Abram, he's missed God's message and he passed right on through the promised land. And in passing through the promised land, he moves on because he wasn't paying attention to God. Many times that's where we're at. It probably won't cost you your life, but it's going to cost you a lot of aggravation. It's going to cost you a lot of unhappiness, perhaps. Here's what happened to Abram. If you was to go to Genesis chapter 12, verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. Abram has left Canaan. He's gone to the N-E-G-V-A-V, Negva, however you want to pronounce it, I don't care. He's gone to the Negva. Now the Negva is just north of Egypt. And a great famine strikes. So he goes on down into Egypt. So, as the scripture was telling us, he has moved on. The very first thing that Abram has to deal with is a famine. Now why is he having to do this? Did God bring a famine on the land because Abram had disobeyed him and moved on? I don't think so, and I think that'd be hard-pressed to sell. I believe that God has taken a bad situation and used it as an attention getter for Abram. Has God ever used a situation to get your attention? Been something going on in your life or your family or whatever it might be, you just feel like you are in a famine. Famine, here they were hungry. You ever found yourself so hungry for fellowship with God and you just can't find it? Does that happen to anyone else? That sometimes we just think, God, where have you gone? Abram could be in that boat. He's not having fellowship with God like he wanted to be. First of all, he's missed the promised land. He's out of the promised land. He's not in a place where he's hearing from God because he moved on. God didn't change. Abram did. So he's in a famine. He's hungry. So he moves on down into Egypt. So the very first thing you're going to see in the story is he's in a mess. Now the next one in Genesis chapter 12, once again verses 11 through 13, as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. The next thing he's going to deal with, once he's left the comfort and surroundings of where God wants him, is fear. Fear and uncertainty. Fear and uncertainty. Now why is that? Well, folks, he's no longer feeling like he's being sheltered by God. Now he's down here in Egypt, and he's fearful for his life. Because Pharaoh has the privilege of being able to say, I want that woman. Bring her to me. And his court even said she was a beautiful woman and should go to Pharaoh. Should go to the leader of Egypt. So they took her away. Many times, and we've all heard this story, but God protects her. Many times, we will find that we are in a time of fear and uncertainty when our relationship with God isn't where it should be. Every one of you who have dealt with fear and uncertainty in your life, if you would trace it back, this is true with me, and it's true with all of us. If we trace it back, we'll find it's because our relationship with God has suffered. Most of the times whenever I'm fearful about something, it's because I'm not in line with what God's wanting me to do. Most of the time whenever I feel uncertainty, it's because I've not allowed God to be my anchor. Instead, I've been drifting and doing one thing or another. See, God brings those things to us and dispels the fear that you have. Each of you today could be dealing with some fears in your life. We have fears in our life because of our family issues, maybe the health of our family. We have fears that we have to deal with. I'm fearful of this or that. And folks, the one thing that I can tell you, and you know we've got a sick daughter, I have to trust in God. I can't handle it myself. I have to trust Him. And He starts dispelling the fears. He starts making the fears go away. But if I'm not anchored to Him, I'm like Abram. I'm in a land where I don't want to be. And I'm fearful of things that are around me. I trust in the promises of God. Abram's going to have to get refocused. So the second thing that he's suffering is fear and uncertainty. Now, we could say it's because of his beautiful wife, and that was a great deal of the problem. But the main problem was he was out of line with God. If your life today, starting this new year, is out of line with God, you're not going to find happiness. It won't be there. You will be searching in a land of Nineveh. You will not find it. You'll be searching in Egypt. Most people who make some effort to follow God suffer when we get out of line with Him. The third thing that Abram suffered, Genesis chapter 12, 14 through 16, when Abram came to Egypt and the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a beautiful woman, and when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. The next thing that we're going to see, and you say, wow, that sounds like he did pretty well. It was failure, folks. Failure. He's going to suffer failure and anxiety. He's being blessed with all the worldly wealth that he could possibly want. Many times we've left that secure job because we see something greener on the other side. Many times we've given up something that we've really enjoyed because we think we're bettering ourselves. Abram's blessed with all the wealth of the world. But he realized he's missed the greatest blessing of all, and that's godly contentment. Being content with his relationship with God. He's in a land where they worship idols. He's not content. He's not happy down there, even though he's becoming wealthy. He's separated from his wife that he loves very much. And he finds himself in a bad situation. Many Christians have passed through the blessings that God has intended for them. Passed through them. Do you ever think that sometimes we have to get right there instead of passing through? I could say this happened to me. I passed through here and left and then come back. I knew where God had intended for me to be, but I had missed it. They still desire God, but they realize that they have failed. Abram dealt with famine, with fear, and failure because he had passed through the promised land. I don't know what your life is like right now, but if you passed through the promised land, if you had become a member of Christ's body, if you had been a Christian, and you passed on for a while, you went on through for a while, I don't know, this isn't what I was thinking it would be. You passed through years of blessings that God had intended for you. Years of opportunity that God wanted to pour out upon you. See, Abram was already 75 years old when he left Haran. He's missed years that God wanted him to have. The next thing that we got to see is a return to the promised land. Genesis chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. So Abram went from Egypt to that place with his wife and everything he had, and Lot with him. Now what do we know? One, he's got possessions that God didn't give him, and two, Lot's with him, and he was told to take no one with him. Remember that? Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. All right, now we're right back. We've made circle right back into Canaan. Right back to where God wanted. He's back there. He's arrived back between Bethel and Ai. Now just south of that will be Jerusalem. All right, just south of that is Jerusalem. Faith, there he called on the Lord. There he called on the Lord. For everyone who really desires to do God's will, Abram desired to do that. There comes a day of reckoning. I will try to find my way back to where God wants me to be. So Abram left Egypt, back to Negev, and then into the Canaan. Right back where God had originally sent him. He says, I will do the will of God. He called upon God to lead him in that way. So he stayed on his path back. You are at a place in your life where here's what's going to happen. If you have passed through the promised land, again, no show of hands, but if you have, you know it, and you're trying to work your way back, God bless you. But there's one of two things. A person will either see their current state and say it's too late, I can't do anything about it, or they'll say I'm going to work my way back to where God wants me to be. Abram made the decision to work his way back to where God wanted him to be. Understand that the current state may not be totally miserable. You may not be totally miserable in your current state of life. You may say, you know, my life's not so bad. Maybe God just has me on the edge of the promised land. Folks, if you're on the edge of the promised land, move on in. You're going to find life a whole lot better. You're going to find that you're going to enjoy it more than you've ever enjoyed it. Or maybe you're clear down into Egypt and you're saying, you know, I've accumulated wealth and security and I've got all this material things. Are you happy with those material things? Well, they're not too bad. I can live with them. Yeah, but are they going to take you where you want to go? Not the promised land on this earth, but the promised land beyond. They probably won't. I know they won't. Yeah, Abram got very rich. But his current state was without God. So Abram wants God to lead his life. And that's what the whole passage is about, is the journey of faith that Abram is on. A journey of faith. Today, I want to ask you about your journey of faith. I want to ask you about where you're at. Many years ago, for most of you, some of you are younger, maybe just recently, God called you. He called you to a journey of faith. He wants you to leave all the security of the world behind and move towards the promised land. He said, I've got a place for you. A place that is not only for you, but for your heirs. Now, does that apply today? Yes, it does. Now, how does that apply today? Here's how. If you are a Christian, you're an adult Christian, and you have children, Tim, what are you going to do here in a little bit?
I'm going to be baptizing my daughter.
You're going to be baptizing your daughter. Yeah. Now, I use that as an example because this is a journey of faith. Whenever he started coming to church, whenever they started coming to church, get over here, whenever they started coming to church, now it's next generation, next generation. How many of you who were first in church, I was first in my family in church, how many of you have grandchildren in church that were first in church? Journey of faith, journey of faith. So it's good for the next generation. God says, I have a promised land not only for you, but for the generation to follow. So I want to take you back to your journey of faith. So God called you. Maybe you were the first in the family that he called. Abram took his father so far. Maybe you've been able to help bring your parents. Maybe you've introduced them to Christ. Some of you, I know that's the case. I've seen my sister develop faith, just like Abram's journey of faith. Now on your journey of faith, let's go back to that. You've arrived at the promised land. Whenever you first become a Christian, wasn't it exciting? Oh man, I was thrilled. I sat down and read my King James Bible like I enjoyed it. How many of you read King James and enjoy it besides Don? I rest my case. I sat down and read it like I enjoyed it. And for all of you who are younger than me, you know why? Because back then that's what there was. And I suffered through it until they finally come out with a Living Bible. How many of you remember the Living Bible? Wow, isn't that something? All of a sudden it's in our language and we say, we don't like this. Because our older people are saying, well, that's not the real Bible. All right. And you start learning a little bit about it and you're excited about it. But then something happens in your life, just like with Abram, and you move on through. And you started into your process of life. And you started accumulating things. How many of you have more things today than you did when you was 20 years old? How many of you have more debt than you did when you was 20 years old? I rest my case. We started accumulating things. That's what Abram has done. He started accumulating all these things. He's got livestock. He's got servants. He's got gold. He's got silver. He's got himself out of the promised land. Well, you get the idea. But all of a sudden one day he wakes up. Things aren't going the way I want them to. Pharaoh's told me to leave Dodge. Get out of town. Where am I going to go? Whenever your world comes crashing down, folks, where do we go? We go back to God. If you've known him, you're going to go back to him. But you may not go back until your world crashes down. I want to ask you right now, don't let your world crash down. Start your journey home. Right now, for 2015, I want you to be looking for the promised land. It may be a year-long journey for you. I want you to find ways to dedicate yourself to this journey of faith. I want you to start thinking about your reading. I'm going to make a commitment. I'm going to ask all of you to join me. Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, has 31 chapters. That's roughly a chapter a day. I'm going to read it every month this year. I'd like for you to join me in that. The book of Proverbs. You're going to learn a lot. Once a month, read through the book of Proverbs. Start your journey of faith. Start learning what God has for you. Abram is going to find blessings beyond blessings. We're going to get to that in the weeks to come. He's still got some things he's got to clean up. But he's going to find blessings beyond blessings. I'd like to tell you today that through God, I can offer you more blessings a year from now than you have today. if you will surrender your life to Him. I'm not talking about playing around the edges. I'm talking about surrendering your life to Him. You'll have more blessings a year from now than you do this day. Will you please stand as we have our invitation?